welcome here this evening for our second webinar in a two-part series, With Great Power Comes Great Responsibility, hosted by ISPCC. The ISPCC is a partner in the Irish Safer Internet Centre, whose vision is a positive and inclusive digital world where children are safe and protected. The webinar is co-funded by the European Union, and we are delivering it this evening with the support of this funding. The webinar this evening is for young people aged 12 plus and their parents and carers, and will focus on online safety and critical thinking. My name is Niamh Clark, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager with the ISPCC Childline. Also joining me on here tonight on the webinar is my colleague Victoria Howson, and she also is a Community Engagement Manager, and Siobhan Harvey, Parenting Lead. And we're absolutely delighted to be here this evening with you. Firstly, I'd like to go over some housekeeping with you all. And then talk a bit about our services and programs that we have on offer. So firstly, you might have noticed that all participants have been automatically placed on mute, with your cameras off. We will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions during the webinar, you can send them into the question and answer function, and we will try to get to them, try and get to as many as possible. And Siobhan will be looking after them this evening for us. If we do not answer your questions, please feel free to contact us afterwards for more information, and all contact details will be shown at the end of the webinar. So just a little reminder that the webinar this evening is being recorded, and it will be made available on the ISPCC digital platforms. So first of all, we're just going to talk a little bit about the services that we have on offer here in the ISPCC. So we have our Childline service, which is probably the best known service. And this is our 24/7 service available to all children and young people up to and including the age of 18 via phones and online chat. We also have our digital mental health and wellbeing programs, which are aimed at reducing anxiety for young children and young people. And also we have our digital programs for parents and carers, and we're managing their anxieties while supporting their anxious teen or child. We also have our support line, which is a listening service offering information, advice and emotional support to parents and carers. And it is open from 9 to 1, Monday to Friday, by calling 01 522 4300. For more information on any of our services, log on to www.ispcc.ie. I'm going to hand you over to Victoria now in a moment, who's going to talk about critical thinking while online, what it is and how you can develop these skills. So thanks, Victoria.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Niamh, for that. So yeah, everyone, tonight I'm going to be talking about critical thinking online. So it's kind of like talking about online safety, but it's something a little bit more specific, because some of you, either in school or with your parents and caregivers already, might have come across the term online safety, and this is going to be a little bit more specific and some tips and skills for you. And as Niamh said, we'll also be taking some Q&As afterwards, so if anyone has any questions about anything I say, please feel free to use that feature and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So, as you're all probably very much aware, we're living in an age where we have entertainment and knowledge and so much more at our fingertips 24 hours a day. So a lot of you may have access already to phones. You might not have access to phones just yet. You may use your mom and dad's or caregivers. You might have an iPad or a laptop, or you have a social media account. So like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or Snapchat. I might be very old by saying that. Maybe some of you are thinking Snapchat isn't actually around as much anymore, but these are all examples of what we may think of when we think of what we do when we're online. So this webinar series aims to tackle the overall arching skill that will help you to be safe online and to keep the balance in play. So you want to be able to use the online world. You want to be a part of it. Of course, it's something that your schools are going to be using to a good extent for your homework. It's something that your friends are going to be using, and it's something that we all use on a daily basis in our jobs, etc. So it's something we need to be aware of. with the age of information that we have, sometimes there's a little bit of an overload. So when it comes to this, sometimes you can get so much information coming at you, you're actually going to get a little bit of misinformation as well. So what do we mean when we say misinformation? This is information that comes from the sources you think you can trust online, but might not actually have been fact checked. It might be information that could steer you wrong and could be information that you might not trust. So when we talk about things like social media, so things like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all that kind of stuff, we talk about as well things like how it can be so beneficial, because there are a lot of benefits of the internet, and I'll be talking about that later on as well, about some of the positives that are out there. But there are also some things, as I said, that we need to be aware of for our own safety. So it's kind of like the quote, which is where this webinar comes from, in Spider-Man. Uncle Ben says to Spider-Man, "With great power comes great responsibility." So allowing this information that's out there coming into our homes, into our schools for about 24 hours a day, there's a lot of great things about it, but we need to have the proper tools. And one of the tools that we can use is critical thinking. So when we wear a critical thinking hat, this helps us to be safe online, but it also can help us in our daily lives. So when we use critical thinking, this can help us with some of the things that are a little bit more dangerous about being online. So some of these issues that cause issues for our mental health, our physical health, and our emotional health, and sometimes even our financial security, and in some cases causing a little bit of a naivety, or sometimes, again, like that misinformation. So for example, if you're online and you find out information about what is happening in one country right now, you will have so many different sources coming at you. The minute you type something into Google, we get a whole load of different links, a whole load of other organizations, companies, etc. out there that are wanting to give you that information. And with that, we need to be able to use our critical thinking hat to think about, well, what information is coming at me right now? And to do this, we can think of 5 key points. So these 5 key points for critical thinking will help guide you to sift through all the information out there, to set the misinformation aside, and to just get the information that's actually going to set you right, that's going to be safe for you, and that is going to help you with whatever needs you have for online. So those points are, number 1, where is the source of information coming from? So when we have critical thinking and we're trying to think of the information that's coming at us, where is that coming from? The link that you go into when you Google something, when you look up something on TikTok or even on YouTube or any of that, where's the information coming from? Who's it coming from? Is it from somebody who you can trust that will, check their facts, who will actually do research on this topic and is coming at it from an unbiased viewpoint? So again, really important to think of that. Where is the information coming from? The second point when we're wearing our critical thinking hat is, what are the intentions behind the information being given? And when we say intentions, we mean the people or the links that you're using to get that information. What are they intending to do with that information? What are they hoping to get from you reading that information or watching that content? Are they trying to make sure that you understand the full situation, or is there another intention at play? The third thing that we think about when we're using critical thinking is, are there paid ads, or are there sources providing the information being influenced by monetary means? And monetary means basically means, who's funding it? Where is this coming from? So for example, if you're watching something on TikTok and you're watching an influencer and they're talking about why they wanted to go to a certain event. So say for instance, they're welcomed into an event and they're talking about how great it was. It's sometimes useful to have a critical thinking moment and say, I wonder why they're being so positive about this event. It's not being cynical. It's just taking a moment to pause and think, why would they be telling me that this event was so good? It's the same that if you have a friend who's telling you about a film and they're telling you that the film was amazing, it was so, so good, but it's a horror film. And you know they actually love horror films. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, they really love horror films, so of course they're going to say it's really good. but I don't really like horror films. So should I take this advice? Should I listen to this advice? Is this good for me? And it's the same when we watch things online or when we're looking up information online. People have their own opinions. So oftentimes when they are putting that online, there is some other intention behind it. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good intention or a bad intention, but it's very important to think about that. And oftentimes, to get online, to get our sources out there, to have a video up and to be seen by a lot of people, there is a lot of sponsorship that goes behind that. So that means money is being given, and that's a huge influential factor for a lot of reasons why people will say or do things. So it's good to have that thought in mind. Fourth point, when we're using our critical thinking hat, is it opinion or fact? Are the sources that you're looking at or are watching, are they anecdotal or are they evidence-based? So for example, this webinar that's coming to you now, all that myself and Niamh and Siobhan are talking about, all that work that we're talking about right now about online safety, we need to look up about that first. We need to do our research to make sure we're giving you the right information. So what that looks like is going to maybe journals or going to books or checking sources online ourselves and using our own critical thinking hats to check to make sure the information that we're talking about is up to date and is the most relevant information for you, as well as making sure that we've checked our sources and checked where it's coming from so that we're delivering evidence-based research for you. We've used our critical thinking hats, so you don't really have to in this instance. But again, when we're getting information online, sometimes it's so much easier to not use our critical thinking hats and just see the first source that comes to us, or watch the first video we see of somebody that we like, or maybe sometimes even somebody is talking about a subject that we have an interest in and we already agree with, and it fits what we think about the world. So we're going to go with that. But when we're using critical thinking and we ask ourselves, is that an opinion of somebody or is it actually a fact? Has it been checked? It helps us to get into the habit of thinking about the information that's coming to us online. And the last point, number 5, when we're using our critical thinking hat, is have you looked at both sides of the coin? When we are online, we do not have the same connections or the same interactions that we have in the real world. And some of those things are beneficial, but some of those things are very different. And what that means is when you're in the real world and you're talking to somebody, if you're talking to, say, a friend in school and they're telling you about another friend of yours, they're giving you their opinion of that friend, and you are listening to them and you're saying, yeah, okay, you might not like that person, but I like that person. I'm friends with that person. I think, they're great. They're really funny. I get on very well with them. And you hear that other person then is saying, well, actually, they've done this to me. They've been kind of mean to me. They haven't listened to me, or they haven't invited me to their parties, or, you're having an interaction with that person and hearing their side of the story. A lot of times when we're online, we don't get to hear other people's sides of the story. Sometimes we'll stick with what we already like or what we already know, and we don't think about the other side of the story. So when we wear our critical thinking hats, what that can look like is when you check a link or when you check information that's coming to you maybe on social media, when you think about what the other person's story can look like, that might mean that you hear about a celebrity who's done something and you think, oh, that celebrity did this thing. But I wonder, is that the full story? Is there other sources out there that I can go to find out more information about this story and hear it from someone else's point of view? Because that again helps us to be critical. And when we do that online, it can also transfer into our everyday lives. And it just means, again, that we're not being cynical necessarily, but we're just thinking about the full picture and making sure we are as aware as possible. So the definition for critical thinking, one of the definitions, is critical thinking happens when individuals, so when we ourselves draw on the existing knowledge, so what we already know and our own experiences, as well as our problem solving skills to do things like compare what we've heard, compare what we know, compare what we've seen, and explain why things are happening. And it also helps us to judge new information and form opinions that we might not have had before. Because sometimes we might have an opinion about a topic. We might say that, going back to our example earlier, we might say that horror films are really scary and that's it. That's my opinion. I think horror films are super scary. I'm not going to watch any. But sometimes, again, when we use our critical thinking hat, we might say, well, not all horror films are the same kind of scariness. They're not the same kind of film. So again, we might want to use our critical thinking hats to say, should I do something else here to form my own opinion on it so that I'm not listening to others all the time? So what are some tips and skills that we can use to utilize these 5 critical points that we've talked about? One of the tips we can do is always look at new information with a cautious eye. And what that can look like is sometimes just taking a step back, taking a pause, and just in our mind's eye, you don't have to do it actually, but just to have in your head this little hand that goes up and that just kind of says, 1 second, let me think about this information and let me see, can I trust this information? Again, what we said was consider more than one viewpoint. Practice this in your daily life. It doesn't just have to be online. It means that when you hear somebody else's opinion that maybe doesn't agree with what you think of something, again, taking that pause and listening to what they have to say and why they think that, and then making your own opinion can be really helpful. Getting as much information as possible can help us to be really critical. So some of you might in school already do this naturally. So when your teacher gives you a subject to learn, they're giving you a lot of different information about that subject. So when we learn history, we don't just learn about one time in history, we learn a lot of different times in history. So we can have a really good opinion about what happened in the past. So we need to do the same thing with the online world. When we're online and when we're using online features like social media, looking up things or gaming or any of the things we might have to do for schoolwork, we think about getting all the information that we can before we make opinions or judgments or before we act. And the last little tip that we can think of when we're trying to be thinking critically is ask a lot of questions. You might have heard that saying, there's no stupid questions, and it's so true. Even in the adult world, we use that. There are no stupid questions. It's the same in real life as it is in the online world. Please do not ever be afraid to ask a question before you do something online, because we are all still learning. Even though the online world has been around now for a few years, many of you have probably never known a world without the online world being there as well. We're still learning, and that's the most important thing. It's okay to ask questions when you're online. You can ask your mom, your dad, another adult that you trust, or even, as Niamh and Siobhan are going to talk more about the services that we have here in Childline, even getting onto one of us and asking us questions about what can you do online. And again, asking those questions before you act can be really helpful. Now, some of the things I've talked about, it sounds like the world of online can be a scary place and there's things you always need to be very cautious of. We know that that's not always the case as well. There are some really lovely benefits to being online. Especially during the COVID pandemic, you might have already seen some of those benefits when you were able to still go to school online. Maybe some of you as well are gamers, and when we play games online, sometimes we can still interact with our friends even though we're on the online world. That's a really lovely benefit of being safe online and using the internet for good things. Also, we kind of mentioned it, but YouTube and TikTok, I know there are so many wonderful things out there that you can look up on how to do recipes. When you're stuck on a problem, you can look up how to do certain maybe maths, or you can look up, again, we mentioned some things about social media, about checking up on the world, and it gives you so much information. That's very exciting and a lovely thing about online. Even things like making our lives a little bit easier, like shopping online, all can be really lovely. But again, even though these things are part of the everyday online world, as we grow up, we need to also grow up into our responsibility of being an online user. A lot of children nowadays and a lot of young people are growing up in a world where the online is normal for you. So you need to make sure that the responsibilities of being online are also normal as well for you. So we've talked about some of the benefits. We also talked about some of the potential risks. Other risks that you should be aware of, and again, is really important to ask questions about and not be afraid to talk about, are some of the things that can happen online if you're not so careful or if you're not using critical thinking. Things like that are sometimes being exposed to inappropriate content. And inappropriate content could be content that you know deep down inside, in your gut, in your belly, that you shouldn't probably be looking at. Or content that you don't understand, which is fine. There's a lot of content out there that we all don't really understand. Or it could be content as well that just makes you feel sad or makes you feel confused. And there's also some of the other negative aspects of being online that can happen to some people, like being bullied online. We all know the word bullying, and some of us know that it can happen in the real world, and we may have had experiences of it happening in the online world as well. Unfortunately, this is something that does happen, and that's why being online and being safe online and using our critical thinking can be so important, is to never take something at face value. So if someone says to you something online, that is their opinion and it's not fact. It hasn't been evidence checked. So you don't have to take it as face value. You can ask questions and make sure that you're getting the right opinion. We also have to be worried about some of the things to do with financial aspects of online safety. So when you're buying things online, or if you're gaming online, sometimes there can be a financial cost. So sometimes you have to pay something to get the thing you want online, or when you're playing a game. That kind of thing as well can be something that, if we're not using our critical thinking hat, can get us into trouble. Because sometimes we might be paying for something, or we might be purchasing something that either we actually shouldn't be getting, or it's going to cost us actually way more money than we think. So again, using our critical thinking hat is really, really helpful. Now, some of you tonight may be here with your mom or dad or another caregiver, and you might be thinking that a lot of this stuff is a lot to take in. So it's really important to ask them questions as well, and to just think in your own head that your mom, dad, or your caregiver is there to make sure you are safe in the real world. When you cross the street, they tell you to look right and left. They make sure that you're safe. They want to do the same thing for you when you're online as well. So it's really important to understand that your mom and dad are also discovering this as well too, that they are using the internet as well, that they're online too. So there's no harm in asking them questions and letting them be there to guide you when you need guidance. So we've gone through the 5 key points for critical thinking. And as my last point, I'd just like to say to make sure that when you are online, to always try to think about using your online critical thinking hat. And I'm going to hand you over to Siobhan now as we kind of draw to the end of tonight's webinar.
That's great. Thanks a million, Victoria. Look, you've shared some really great, insightful information there, and I think there's a lot to take in, as you mentioned, for everyone watching this evening. I really liked those 5 key points that you spoke about in relation to critical thinking, and I think it's really good to actually ask those questions. You know, the fact versus opinion. Have you looked at 2 sides of the coin, and checking out where the source of the information is coming from? So really, really good, really insightful. There was a lot there, so if anybody does have any questions, do pop it into the Q&A, and we'll answer them and that as well. And look, we really hope that you found this webinar helpful this evening and that you have learned something new.
And before we finish up, I would like to remind you of the services that we do have for young people and for parents and that. So we do have our Childline listening service that is there, and that's our phone service 24 hours a day, and that's online chat as well as the phone. And our other programs are digital mental health and well-being programs, and these are for young people who are suffering from mild to moderate anxiety, and it's also digital programs for parents as well and carers of children and young people. And if you want any more information in relation to these, you can log on to our website and you can find out some more around them and that. So listen, before we finish up and before we conclude, I would like to say a very big thank you to everyone and to everyone here this evening and for watching. And again, if you need to contact us, you can log on to the ISPCC website.